Hello, and welcome to a new episode of When All Is Read and Done. I'm Josh.
And I'm Amy, and this is a podcast where we make sense of the world one book at a time. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. Stay tuned to the end of this episode where we will be announcing our 2 lucky giveaway winners. So Josh, what have you been reading or doing this week?
Yeah, this week, I actually signed up for the AstraZeneca vaccine.
No way!
Yeah. So I will be getting it in a couple of weeks' time. And I don't know if you've been following the news back here, but the rollout of vaccines in Malaysia actually has been pretty bad. And having to compete with other people for a vaccination slot really isn't great. But, I'm still grateful to get one pretty soon. And Hannah Alkaf, whom you love, has been on Twitter, and she has had a couple of threads on her experience getting the vaccine and the side effects, and that was really reassuring. So big shout out to her. What about you, Amy? What have you been reading or doing?
I also have some great news. So I finally stopped procrastinating and sat for my UK driving exam, and I just passed the theory test this week.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. So I feel like I'm a pretty confident driver. I have been driving for the past 15 years in Malaysia, but I was just putting it off for the longest time, and I finally bit the bullet and, sat for my theory test.
Well, I have a secret to share with you, Amy.
Oh gosh, what's that?
So when I sat for the Malaysian driving theory test, the first couple of times I failed the test.
Oh no! I feel like I don't know anyone who's failed the driving test in Malaysia because it's so easy. For our international listeners, we do have this I would say negative stereotype in Malaysia that drivers from Penang are notoriously bad, and what you've done now is just reinforce the stereotype.
Yeah, but I'll have you know that I am much better now. I've improved. So. So you don't have to actively avoid me if you see me on the road. Amy, do you want to tell our listeners what we are going to be talking about this week?
Sure. So in this episode, we are going to be discussing the intersection of art and politics, and we'll be asking ourselves pretty tough questions like, does an author's political beliefs or poor behavior affect how you enjoy their books? Can we separate the artist from the art? So we're not trying to cancel these books in this episode, but what we hope to be able to pick this topic apart so that we can reconcile our love for books with the issues that we might have now.
Yeah, when we were planning out this episode, I think we both realized there's just so much ground to cover here that we couldn't possibly do it in one episode. So what we will be doing is going to be in 2 parts. We will be covering cancel culture, although I personally don't like that term, or consequence culture, right, in the next episode, and share our views on the debate surrounding how publishers are trying to balance appeasing everyone on the political spectrum. That's going to be the larger picture view that we are going to be doing in the next episode. For today's episode, however, is going to be a little bit more personal, right? So we will be talking about our favorite authors and how we reacted when we found out that they had said or done things which we disagree with. But first, I think we need to talk about childhood authors that we loved that we have now come to realize are problematic. So why don't you kick us off, Amy?
Yeah, so quite recently, a number of Dr. Seuss children books have been recalled by the Dr. Seuss Foundation itself due to racist caricatures. Now, I didn't read all that many Dr. Seuss's books in the past, nor do I have any sort of nostalgic or emotional tie to these books. But another similar example I can think of that's more personal to me is Roald Dahl. So I absolutely adored his books as a kid, and even some of his more mature stories as a teenager. So I haven't read Dahl in years and years, but many of you know that I'm learning Spanish. And this year I bought myself a copy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in Spanish to read it again. And this time with 2021 glasses. So I wonder how much you remember about this book, Josh.
Well, I read it ages and ages ago, right? So I can't remember much about it. And really, the only Roald Dahl book that has stuck in my mind, and you're going to love this, Amy, is Rhyme Stew.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I remember Rhyme Stew at all is because of Dao's version of Mary Mary, right? Which goes Mary Mary, quite contrary. How does your garden grow? I live with my brat in a high-rise flat, so how in the world would I know?
Yeah, exactly. So this was the kind of humor that I still remember so fondly. So coming back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, because things are going to start getting a bit hairy in this episode. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was published in 1964, and in the book, the Oompa Loompas were described as a race of African pygmy people that Willy Wonka found starving in the depths of the jungle, surviving on caterpillars.
Oh
And he pretty
man.
much rescued them by smuggling them back to England to work in his chocolate factory to be paid in chocolate, so not even money.
Oh
So,
no.
so
This
already this
exploitation.
exactly. So before his death in 1990, Dahl did acknowledge how problematic this was. It was by no means an apology, I think. And in later versions of this book, the description of the Oompa Loompas were revised. Although I must say that in the version that I read, it still hung so heavy with like imperialism and white
Mhm.
supremacy. Now, do I believe that a dead author should be held accountable for a book that was written during the tail ends of the British Empire? No, but did I still enjoy Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in 2021? I would say I largely still did. For me, the
Mhm.
creative value of the book and it being, the ultimate underdog story, that still holds true. But would I
Mhm.
read this to my future children? Like, I don't think so. So we have
Mm.
so many wonderful and relatable own voices authors these days, and over time these historically popular authors will fade away. So whether this is Dahl or Dr. Seuss, they are the product of their time, and their works should be read as such. So how we think about equality, about literature, and even about humor, like that has changed so much over the course of time, and that is
Yeah.
precisely the point, isn't it? Like social
Yeah.
norms are supposed to evolve, and they will continue to do so. Some of the values now that we think of as normal today in 2021, it will not hold true in, let's say, 2051.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think we have to point out that this issue really isn't limited to the British Empire, although I have to give a shout out here to my once beloved Enid Blyton and her blatant classism and xenophobia that really wasn't cool in it.
Mm-hmm.
But you make an excellent point about the intersection of equality and humor, right? And how things have changed. And this reminds me of a comic series, surprise, surprise,
Comic series.
that I loved growing up. The Adventures of Tintin by the Belgian writer
Yep.
Herge. If you want to talk about problematic authors, well, Herge was a Nazi collaborator, and Tintin was created as an anti-socialist propaganda, right? So there's all that. And if you read Tintin today, though, I think you quickly realize why these books are so beloved. Have you read any Tintin at all, Amy?
I have watched the TV series, but not the comic books.
Yeah, so if you read the comics, right, the humor is largely great, and they have these globe-spanning adventures. They are really a whole lot
Mm-hmm.
of fun, and I think the center of the books are the friendships between the characters, right, and these are really among the most endearing in all of fiction. And Tintin, together with the much less problematic Asterix and Obelix, are a great gateway for people looking to get into European comics.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look a little closer, and you find that these books are littered with racial stereotypes and colonialist ideals, right? So characters from Africa and Asia, in particular, are often painted in a negative light. I think the most egregious examples can be found in Tintin in the Congo. And there is a scene
Mm.
where Tintin is speaking to a class of Congolese children. He says, "My dear friends, I'm going to talk to you today about your fatherland, Belgium."
Good God.
Oh, or there's a scene where a tribe member actually says to Tintin, "White master very fair, him very good white." And you don't really need to know anything about the brutal colonization of the Congo by the Belgians to see why this is extremely problematic. In fact, it is so controversial that Tintin in the Congo is actually excluded from some Tintin collections that you can buy today. Similar to Dao, though, Hirsch did come to
Mm-hmm.
regret some of his work, although he might not have been the best at taking accountability, I must say. So he gave this fantastic non apology where he said, "I was fed the prejudices of the bourgeois society that surrounded me." But still, to his credit, he did go back and replace some of the more overtly racist portions of his comics. And I think you're right when you say that these books should be viewed as products of their time. Reading it through that lens, though, can be tricky, especially when you consider that these books, like Dow's books, are
Mm.
aimed squarely at children.
Yep.
And there's also a question of historical and cultural erasure, right? Should we eliminate everything from our literary past that we find distasteful? And I think it's a difficult question to answer. So there's an article from the East by West that's titled Tintin, the Land of Cancel Culture. I think that's a great title, which we'll link in the show notes. And it quotes Krishnadev Kalamur, who wrote Coming to Terms with Tintin, who says, there were things that I love about Tintin that made it easier to reject things I did not without ignoring them altogether. And I think that pretty much sums up how I feel about Tintin. But Amy, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about authors that wrote in a different era who have now since passed on. But what about those who are still living, still mostly beloved, that have presented problematic views and have perhaps doubled down on those views? I think we both know who I'm talking about here.
Yes, absolutely. That's my old friend J.K. Rowling. So breaking up with J.K. Rowling in public must be the most distressing thing for a Harry Potter fan to do. Josh,
Yeah.
you know, I was, see how I'm still struggling with this. Like I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and I have been since I was 8 or 9 years old. I was one of those children who queued outside the bookstore to get the books on the first day. And when I first moved to London, the first place I wanted to visit was Platform 9 3/4.
Yeah, well, see, I went to see it on one of those days when I came back from watching the Liverpool game and I arrived at 5 in the morning, so there were no crowds because usually there's a huge crowd around that area, right? I needed to see what the fuss was all about, and Amy, it's literally a wall, Amy.
Josh, what if I told you I had a Harry Potter tattoo?
Really?
No, I'm kidding. No, I really don't. I really don't.
Okay.
But as an adult, you know, I still periodically picked up the books. So most recently in 2020. So Rowling's problematic tweets, when they first came out, I was right smack in the middle of listening to Stephen Fry reading all of the Harry Potter audiobooks. It was like 99 hours and 57 minutes being tormented about whether or not it was finally time to break up with Harry. So what did Rowling say exactly, and why were they problematic? First, she took issue with a DevX article about menstrual health because they used the phrase people who menstruate rather than women. As with all developmental organizations, you know, they strive to be inclusive. So as we know, not all women menstruate. Trans women, menopausal women, women who've had hysterectomy, they all don't menstruate. And additionally, some trans men do. This inclusivity seemed to rub Rowling the wrong way. So she made fun of their choice to not use the word women. At first, I thought, okay, she made a joke in bad taste. She can apologize and then we can all move on, right? So when people called her out for it, she wrote a long series of tweets, which was essentially sorry, not sorry. So she said, and I quote, I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it is hateful to say so. So at that point, I thought, okay, Rowling, I don't agree with you, but you're entitled to your own opinion. And she seemed to genuinely believe that trans women were not women. And by acknowledging them as such, it diminishes her experience as a woman. But it didn't end there, because she went on to publish a 3,500 word essay justifying her opinion. And in the same essay, also revealing that she was a survivor of sexual assault. It was a horrible, tangly mess, and the final nail in the coffin, it came several months later when, in her new book, Troubled Blood, it depicts a murderous cisgender men dressing up as a woman to murder women. So essentially digging herself deeper into her, PR grave.
Yeah, and I can relate somewhat. So I was in the middle of reading The Astonishing X-Men Omnibus. It was written by Joss Whedon when the news broke of Charisma Carpenter's allegations of abuse by Whedon on the set of Buffy. If you're not aware of these allegations, we will link to Charisma's tweets on the matter. But suffice to say, I stand with Charisma Carpenter, and it immediately destroyed any enjoyment I was getting out of the book. So I don't know how you powered through 99 hours of Harry Potter after these came out. But How did you feel when you were reading Rowling's tweets and essay on this?
I mean, I certainly do not agree with her views, and there must be consequences to the things you say. So, for many people, especially in the trans and larger LGBTQI community, this was extremely hurtful because it goes against everything that the Harry Potter books stood for. She wrote a gay main character into the book, although retroactively saying he's gay, but at the time, there was no gay representation in children's literature whatsoever.
Yeah, so I think it's a good time for me to jump in here and say I've never actually read any of the Harry Potter books. I've seen all the films, if that makes any difference. So maybe my views aren't valid, but her retroactively making Dumbledore gay never made sense to me. In my opinion, it actually felt exploitative.
Well, neither did all her sort of like retroactive Twitter world building, if I'm honest. So Rowling, she tries really, really hard to stretch the Harry Potter experience to beyond just the 7 books. I really wish that we could go back to, a simpler time where our biggest issue with Rowling is her trying to make Fantastic Beasts a thing. Alas, we can't. So we have come to a point today where we're asking ourselves, can we actually separate the art from the artist? I would say in 2021 that it's extremely, extremely difficult. Everything is so instantaneously visible. Authors have to be politically active. They have to be vocal on social media in order to sell books. They're not merely selling books, but also part of their personalities.
Yeah.
Whether we like this or not, we're not just consuming the books, but we're also consuming part of their politics. I feel like I would still enjoy reading Harry Potter for better or worse, because these stories are just so ingrained in me now that Rowling can't take that away. But if I had never read the books, I would probably not feel the same. So similarly, I would never pick up any of her future books. For me personally, I would draw the line when your words have harmful impact on others. When she made fun of people who menstruate, fine, that was bad taste. But when she uses her massive platform to push unscientific opinions about hormone therapy and access to trans healthcare, that is just not okay.
Yeah, I think reading Rowling's essay, the part that I disagree with the strongest is when she conflated sexual assault with a trans person's right to use the bathroom of their choice. Now, I am truly sorry that she suffered domestic violence and sexual assault, but using that to argue against trans women's safety by forcing them to use a men's bathroom and I think this is worse, linking trans persons with acts of violence is really crossing the line. So if I were a Harry Potter fan, I think similar to you, Amy, I would stop picking up any of Rowling's new books. Still, at the end of the day, only you can determine where the line is drawn, right? I personally cannot separate art from artists, but perhaps other readers can. And I want to quickly touch on the tricky question of collaborators. This is especially true for graphic novels, right? And you know how much I love graphic novels.
Yes.
So Whedon didn't write Astonishing X-Men alone. John Cassidy drew it, Laura Martin colored it. There was a whole team of letterers and editors who worked on the publications. So should their work be neglected because Whedon is an alleged abuser? I know there's still a lot to talk about, especially whether any duty lies on publishers to stop promoting books from certain authors, or if that should be left as a choice to the individual reader. So if you're interested to hear our thoughts on that, tune in to our next episode.
Yeah.
To end this episode, though, we are going to give our RADRecs alternatives to Harry Potter and Tintin. So, Amy, what is your alternative to Harry Potter, if any exists?
Yeah, of course. We're in 2021. Alternatives do exist for anything that you can think of. So if you're like me, you're a former Harry Potter fan and you've just broken up with Harry and Rowling, and you're looking for a fantasy series to binge without entering the chamber of TERFs, I would I would highly recommend N.K. Jemisin. So Jemisin has an impressive resume of completed and also ongoing fantasy series, as well as short stories that you can dip your toes into. She also writes queer, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and also typically overlooked communities in her main characters front and center. And she does this so respectfully and so beautifully as well.
Yeah, I have to second that. I have read her Broken Earth trilogy, and it is absolutely fantastic. If anybody loves the adventure and friendship that's present in Tintin, you can actually find something similar in the delightful Belgian series Asterix and Obelix by Goscinny and Uderzo. So it's about these Gaulish warriors who have adventures and fight against the Roman Empire post-Gallic Wars during the era of Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar does pop up, Mark Antony, and even Cleopatra does show up as well, right? And if you have never read Asterix and Obelix before and are checking it out for the first time, I really envy you because you're going to be having so much fun. And now, speaking of fun, Amy, I believe you've got an exciting announcement for our listeners, right?
Yes, I do. So I'm going to be announcing our giveaway winners. So the 2 lucky winners for our giveaway on Instagram, they're Camilla Imaricio and Ephraim De. We will be getting in touch with you shortly via Instagram, so do check your DM.
Yeah, congratulations, Camilla and Ephraim.
If you like this episode, do subscribe to When All Is Read and Done on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you would like to support us, please rate, review, or share this episode with a friend or loved one. This would really help our little podcast grow and reach new listeners. We would love to hear your feedback and comments on this episode or any topics that you would like us to cover in future ones. You can reach us either on Instagram at readanddone or via email at readanddonepod@gmail.com. Until next time, everyone. Bye, Josh.
Bye.